Father Whalen had mustered all his strength, for he was zapped after he had to calm the terrified civilians down, which took nearly 45 minutes. We had been staying in this church for about an hour and 30 minutes, and the fire luckily had not spread to the Christ's home just yet. Rest was what I truly needed, but the fear of getting burned alive froze me from it. The fear of my family perishing made me wide awake. Maria had nearly slept the entire time, except for the few minutes every now and then that she awoke, in which I played horse and carriage until she fell asleep again. Most of the people in here had fallen asleep and was taken by slumber. I had drained a few mugs of stale water and dribbled down some dry bread to somewhat beside my hunger. Now, as I laid against the bony cobble wall that felt cold like a winter's day, Mr. Whalen approached me and my father, which my father sat up careful not to further damage his hurt leg. He asked, "What is the matter, Father?" Father Whalen merely bowed.
"Nothing is the matter, sir, but I thank you for asking. I've approached you since I am to bestow my greatest thanks to you and your wife. I've come to recognize you while you entered my church over an hour before. I understand you were Francis, the famous captain and seafaring mariner, and this is your wife, Lila Hartstone, who has donated much to our church, I am pleased to understand."
My mother smiled stiffly. "Whatever I can do for your flock, I tend to, sir. I know your church was in need of dire coin, but mainly now.
If we make it out of this mess, we'll be sculpting a beautiful rosary for you that will stand in the outside gardens." Mr. Whalen bowed. "Thank you, sir." My mother thanked him. "God can only be so merry." He grinned. My father grunted. "I suppose, but I thank you, kind sir, for your hospitality to the people of England and of my family."
I remembered for many years as a boy before Maria was born in the early 1650s, she would donate much money from my father's exchanges with previous visits of the East India Company. For this, church was the closest to us without too long of a voyage to London town to attend Mass on Wednesdays or Sundays. My mother was a devout Christian who made me and Maria pray at every meal, and I knew this was seldom followed by my father, but she was accepting that he had his own beliefs. I'd also noticed that they had made up for their little argument from earlier this night in the woods. She was lying back in his lap, with his arms strung around her, but enough leaning to where she hadn't hurt his leg. My mother had already rebandaged his leg and replaced a nice splint, but not of wood, but of leather. My father agreed once the fire ceased he was to see a doctor in town immediately to remedy his wound. The priest's chubby jowls jiggled as he spoke.
"Is this your daughter and son?"
"Yes, this is Maria, who has grown tired from this night of horrors, so we are letting her rest till morning," my mother smiled.
"A little one should not have to see such violence and terror," the priest mumbled.
"No, she shall not,"
my mother said sadly.
"This is my young son Henry, but he mostly goes by Hal."
I waved at the priest. "How do you do?" "I'm quite fine other than the fire. But the wine from one of the cellars calmed my nerves, so to speak." He laughed, although thinking of this priest drinking was odd, but I presumed that during a disaster like this, he would take this action. "Wine is a good stiller. White mainly," my father added.
"How long have you been tending your flock, Father?" my mother asked.
"Oh, my great-great-grandfather was a monk in the 1400s who built this church. Been standing over for 200 years, and it was his. Then my great-grandfather, then my father's father, then my father's now mine. I've kept it in good stead for many years now, and it is like my own personal home indeed. It's truly a glorious place for people to pray to the Lord." "That is just wonderful, Father," my mother smiled. "I am sorry to be a bother, but the gravedigger, Mr. Stonemas, is in dire need of burying some of the caskets in the graveyard at the side of the priory. Some of the people here are too weak to aid him, but you, sir," he pointed to me as he squatted down in his robes, "seem to be capable with the strength of a youth." "I'm terribly sorry, sir, but you see I grow very weary of—" My father jabbed in. He will help. I shot him with confusion.
Father, I protest.
Henry! Father Whalen has shown us the greatest kindness in letting us stay here for the night until tomorrow. A greatest gesture would be you aiding the gravedigger in this process would repay his admirations. I stared at my father, irritated for a second, then turned back to the priest. I will be much obliged to help. Very good. He is outside. He just needs help lowering one last casket.
Sweetheart, take the lantern from my bag.
My mother handed me the dangling glass lantern. Before I stood up, Father Whalen stopped me. Oh, a little note. Mr. Stonemoss can be a little, mad. Mad. Yes, mad he is. He is indeed. Do not give him too much trouble. Splendid, I said sarcastically. I slipped on my coat and scarf from the cold air outside and dodging over the sleeping people while a few men sat at an oak table near the podium playing cards, drinking, and smoking pipes. A pile of gold coins was in the middle. I quickly opened the glass lid as I held the lantern out in front of me, dangling on a black metal handle. Inside was piles upon piles of old gray ash where a small white wick sat in the center, and some wax had plastered the glass sides around it from previous uses. I flicked a match to life and lit the wick and closed the lid. As I pushed open the doors and felt the cool wind of the fall seasons, I heard the priest hobbling through the pews and chairs to the men smoking at the table. Oh, gentlemen, I beg you please do not smoke in the house of God. The men gambling, Simmy replied. There be a raging fire outside. I think God will understand. As they laughed, I closed the door behind me. I hurried to the side of the church through the grass as I heard the flames in the background in the city. And ahead was a wall of dark oaks, and beyond that darkness I heard the howling of wolves in the distance, and appeared to see a full moon aglow above. A dark fog surrounded the land. I felt an eerie ambiance as I marched on, my boots slapping the weeds, and a lantern lighting only a few feet ahead of me, as the metal groaned as the lantern swayed in my palm. As I came around the towering buildings, I could see the cemetery. I pushed through the iron gate and aimed my lantern through it. The darkness was deafening, shrouding my vision to just a few feet ahead. Walking over the dead always gave me chills to the bone, knowing their skeletons lie beneath my boots. Once alive, people now dead, lost to the world buried beneath a sarcophagus of soil. As I passed the lantern light lit graves for a few seconds. The tombstones were old, cracked, withered, and had moss growing at the sides, with old weeds intermeshed with some so long it covered the names on them. Some read, Ben Booker, 1567 to 1600. Elizabeth Crunch, 1607 to 1634. William Stormgate, 1623 to 1627. Eleanor Rich, 1635 to 1645. Then some began to appear before me as dates about today. Peter Stone, 1660 to 1666. Emily Blunt, 1665 to 1666. Nicholas Craft, 1634 to 1666. Abigail Brooms, 1640 to 1666. And more than hundreds lined with tombs. As I walked further, I even spotted an old grave dated back to 1408 of a monk buried here. Mr. Stonemoss? I called out. I heard nothing. I tried again. Sir! Hello! This time, before even realizing, he jumped in front of me and the glow of the lantern made him appear before me like he was a ghost out of thin air. I jumped back startled and he slowly turned and looked at me and laughed. He smiled a row of crooked teeth that were stained brown with bits of food between the gaps, and his sullen gray hair tumbled down his lower back. He wore raggedy clothes and stockings and old beaten leather boots. He was holding a shovel spattered with mud and weeds, and past him was a square-shaped hole dug about 7 feet deep and a pile of wet, fresh soil beyond that next to the tombstone that read, Manny Matthews, 1608 to 1666. He tossed the iron shovel in the old grass. Did I startle you, boy? No, sir, but you just gave me such a fright. I breathed heavily. He tipped his hat with one thumb to reveal a greasy forehead and place his hands on his hips. This is what most people do when they see me. Get scared because I'm just an old gravedigger. Been working for 30 years, yes I have. Tending to the dead, talking to them, putting them to rest. There's sometimes I consider my friends. I can even hear the dead boy, hear them telling me how they died, or wife cheated on her husband, how they got murdered on the whole tale. I stared at this man and clearly was mad to the tooth and nail. Well, sir, my name is Henry. I was here to aid you with the task of burying these poor corpses here. I muttered as I held their lantern out. Aye? Did Father Wayland send you? Yes. Oh, that damn priest. Always thinking I can't do anything on my own. He don't know a bird from a fox, you know what I'm saying, boy? No, sir. Never mind my sayings. Wow, just rambling. Help me here with this coffin. I set the lantern down on the grass and walked over to lift the black coffin that looked like it would hold a vampire more than anything. The lantern gave off our dark shadows against the sides of the dark church. We both grabbed the hold of the coffin handles. Okay, on 3 we lift. Yes, sir. 1, 2. What comes after 2? 3? Ah, yes, 3. That's what I said. We hoisted it upwards, and I almost dropped it from how heavy it was. My legs danced under it, and we moved it over the hole and began to lower it. But I accidentally tripped, and we dropped the coffin. The black lid slid open halfway, revealing the corpse. I yelped and stumbled back to see a man that wasn't a man anymore. His whole body was charred black flesh. His face was caved in, his skeleton skull protruding out of his head, his teeth cut upward like he was trying to sing. His eye sockets were empty, and bugs crawled around his burnt clothes inside the red velvet coffin. Mr. Stonemouse made cooing noises. Woo! Shame. Real shame. Man, he got it terrible. Burned to a crisp like pork. Just terrible. Well, looks like you have to close the lid and jump on down there. I slowly looked at him. Why can't you do it? You're the gravedigger. Why me? Why, you. You came out here to help me and all, and I appreciate the effort. But I simply am old. I got old knees, lad. Can't crawl there with the broken knees. I can hurt myself. I'm just a wee old man, laddie. Older than your poppy, about 70 years. I sighed, held my breath, and jumped down the hole, my boots hitting wet dirt as I saw wriggling worms shimmy their way through the earth. I bent over and gripped the lid and stared straight to the dead man's face, and it was as if I could hear how he died, the screams and how the flames took him, and I shivered. Then the decaying stink of rotting meat hit my nose, and I doubled over and vomited. Mr. Stonemouse laughed from up above the shallow hole. Ooh, boy, laddie, he threw up there. Can't even stand the smell. Roasted that he is. Sure the smell ain't pretty. I barked back at him. Do you want to come down here and assist me, old man? No, you're doing just fine, lad. He giggled in a hoarse tone. Fucking gravediggers, I muttered. I wiped my mouth and tried not to look into those empty sockets, watching a giant spider crawl in and out of it, and into the other. A fat black rat with red eyes and buck teeth squealed and ran into a burrow behind the coffin. Jesus, this place is infested with critters, sir! I screamed in fear and disgust. What'd you expect? It's a grave, boy. With all my might, I shut the lid tight and scrambled up out of the hole. I stood there panting from the work and the heat down there like an old oven. Well, time to get digging the dead. It took us only 5 minutes to throw the soil with shovels from the lantern light as it lit a glow for us to see. Once finished, the earth was flat and fresh like a hole was never there in the first place. His grave stood new and proud, carved stonework, and his name etched into it. Flowers adorned his graves from roses to tulips. I bent down and picked up the lantern and wiped the sweat from my brow. That was some good digging. Mr. Stonemouse lit a pipe and smoked the sweet plant. I did most of the work, he muttered. That you did, I? Now Manny's got a good grave to sleep in with a nice coffin. Never knew Manny personally, but I'm sure he was a saint. But then again, I don't have many friends. I looked at the old man in the lantern light. You don't say. Well, laddie, a thing or two you need to know about burying bodies is... I once saw a crow pecking on a dead man's eyeball a few years back while I was trying to bury him. Nasty things, aren't they? Good night, Mrs. Stonemouse. I said, feeling uncomfortable, and began making my way back to the church. Oh, yes. Good night, laddie.